back to the time when humanity was called Saptapana. Saptapana was man plant. The atmosphere was very much hyperhydrogenated. It was a complex hydrogen energy. You'll understand that as we go back in time to the one atum, as Dr. Oyibo speaks about, there was only one element. The compounding of element is the multiplication of the one. So when you see one, then the next one, helium. Helium is 2 hydrogen atoms. And you go along the periodic table, it's all the addition of different qualities of helium, of hydrogen, being the one thing, manifesting as the many. As man began to consolidate around a particular projected form, it brought with it all of the atomic energies that it needed, consolidated into different forms that it took in order to consolidate the body we have right now. As man condensed into denser and denser atmospheres, into the envelope we had, it did not bring an appetite with it because the place it came from had no appetite. It was the one thing. In fact, it gave more than it needed to take back. As man consolidated deeper and deeper into the levels of matter, it finally found certain envelopes that matched the different frequency levels as it became denser and denser. So man actually is not evolved. Man is a condensed energy. It's a condensing or a threshing out from inside out until solidification came to be. Now, that sunlight, that one dot, that one point where everything emanated from, has points all over to reference itself. And I told you one time that God is a point that can be found everywhere, a center, a point everywhere, and whose circumference is nowhere. So the point that you see us as now is essentially the consolidated one finding itself as the many. And why am I talking about that? Because the origin of the vampires and all the different ways that you see it happen there, all happen is a disjointed story from different pieces that everybody got a little piece of the puzzle, but nobody has brought it together to show you what really happened. The reason why I'm taking you back to the time how man came into being, I don't even have the time to give you all the different pieces. I'm nutshelling it as man condenses. Just like, to give a for instance for the people, just as water vapor through densification, molecular densification becomes water. You come from the invisible realm into water, liquid, and then under conditions of vibration, because all things are waves and vibratory. As vibrations begin to slow from the higher realms to the low, they're solid. So you go from vapor, liquid, to solid. That is the process of man. In fact, that is the process of all creation. It is a condensing solidification process. As man came, and they talked about the breathing of the soul in it. The breathing of the soul, the breathing of the spirit into man is the breathing of the intent. And intent had to create itself as polarity. The breath is the representation of polarity, yin, yang. Every time you breathe in, there's a spot. Take in, get pulled out, there's a spot. So that's the point where you see the breath, the black and the white. Where you breathe in, the black, there's still the white, that's the space. As you breathe out, you see the black, that's the space, you see the white. So everything is manifesting to keep a balance. Okay. As man began to become more and more solidified in that realm, the principle of darkness, or the principle of invisibility, is black. Okay? When you can't see something, that too is black. I don't care if you can see all the light. The lack of ability to see that is darkness. So as man began to become consolidated into form, the best absorber or the best retainer for the body was the blackness. So that container that you see, the blue blackness, was the original man as the original processor of the purity of light. Okay, so that blue black person, in fact the blue black person was not in the desert. The blue black person that you see was actually in the rainforest. So if the rainforest has this huge canopy, where was the sunlight to keep this man blue black? unless the man was already blue-black when he came, and came down as the original being inside of it. They say, well, all the plants and everything were all there. Yeah, all the plants and everything were there waiting for him, all the animals, because those were the representative expressions of thoughts. Everything that is alive is the representative residual of thought. So as man began to consolidate itself, and in that consolidation experienced his environment, he began to process it as an experience through what he thought as thinking. Mind became thought. And these residuals began putting it down. And why am I doing all this? Because you'll understand what happened and what cut us off. As man began to become consolidated into civilizations, there were civilizations that were not civilizations. There were no laws that man made in order for man to be. Man left the body and came in the body. Man took it anytime he wanted, left it when he wanted it. There was no consolidated process of seasons and so forth to match the disruption of the waveform. Consciousness is restricted awareness. So as man began to become more and more conscious of itself, it had to restrict itself from the one thing. So the more restriction it made, the more it needed to know about itself. It created that. As man began to formulate itself amongst different bands, there was a disturbance, some kind of destruction from that sameness, because anything that creates in life, that creates an environment where everything is too stable, nothing progresses. The part that man has created, the part that is intent, the part of the seed of chaos is what's called. The seed of chaos is implanted in every living entity, because if it wasn't there, the entity wouldn't strive to perfect itself. There is always a disturbance in perfection in order for perfection not to die within its own perfection. Okay, so as that happens, as man began to proceed deeper into the realms of matter, matter now showed that it needed all forms of experience and all forms of interfacing of the mind in order for it to be spiritualized. For matter to be spiritualized, the human form had to become more inventive in order to process the seeds of thought into spirit. In other words, this is a potential spirit. All this is an agreement to be. Once we stop agreeing with this, then we no longer are part of this agreement, and therefore we move forward. There are entities who chose, who at this time in humanity, we were just out there just thinking and making things happen. There were entities that came and said, you're not supposed to do that. Let's just say that, because I can't get as deep as I want to, because we can go along. You're not supposed to do that. This is where in humanity, all along the planet, you get these things where man was perfect and was tempted. Well, man was co-opted because there were different entities, and okay, we got to go back to the point where there's a form of creation that is based upon another form of creation rather than coming from the direct source. The direct source are first level entities, then there's second level entities that belong to the residuals that I talked about, the animal plane. Well, there are residuals that come from higher forms of life that have a living consciousness that can interface with us right now, and you would think that they were human beings, but they were not. Okay, let me just, there's so much to talk about in so little time. So I'm bringing as much as I can into this. Now, here we have man in its descent into matter, and the story of man's descent into matter is all in the Bible, all in the Sefer Yetzirah, all in the different forms, all in the book of Coming Forth by Day. All of the heavy books are about man's descent into matter and man's ascent out of matter. Okay? So now as we're looking at all of what's happening, the story of the vampire, where you meet with pyre being fire, and the vam or am or vam or ram, the ram fire, which is essentially the high Aries energies when you're talking about the pineal. When you're dealing with the vampire energy, we became parasitic by taking on the physical body and cultivating appetites. The only way that you become a vampire is if you cultivate an appetite. So everybody's a vampire. Essentially, that's what happened when you notice in Wesley Snipes' new vampire movie, everybody on the planet is a vampire now. Why is that? Because they had to come back to what it really was. Everybody is a vampire. But what degree do you operate on your vampirism? Do you vampire the plant life? Do you vampire the animal life or the blood? Or do you go to the higher levels of your vampirism and you vampire humans? And they're different levels. Now the dark ones that used to take of the sun, that was us. We were the original sun creatures because the sun had a very high, hydrogenated energy. In fact, there was a hydrogen halo around this planet that kept a specific temperature, kept a specific atmosphere, and there was no need for any kind of hostility. There was no aging. There was none of that. When that fell during the 40 days and 40 nights of rain, during the time it was supposed to be an atomic cataclysm, everything went to hell and back, but that was the experiment. What could man do now outside of the garden? What happened? The higher creatures who are supposed to be our big brothers and sisters set up specific situations where entities who needed to come into certain levels of teaching mechanisms would use the bodies to come in here to do certain things to spiritualize our level of consciousness, and then they would be stationed in different areas. I'm giving you the story now. Stationed in different areas with the knowledge they received while in the physical body, and they would then help to resurrect. That's where the Jesus and the Buddha and the Zoroasters and the Amens and all of these came in here. This is a school. Okay. The vampirism turned into what it is we dealt with because the blood and the sperm, see, they're not just going for the blood. It is the essential essence, the light, the crystalline light that is the blood is what they're going after. They're not just going after the corpuscles. They're going after what the corpuscles give off. And if you look at sperm, sperm has a very high potassium level to the point where you put it under a microscope and it glows in the dark. Right. Those vampires have to take you right. But that's symbolic. It's symbolic of where they're going to find the light. Because that's the most heavily melanated area at the area. They're going back to the black. So when you become a vampire and you start dealing with just the sun, the rays of the light, you're dealing with the invisible ray spectrum, which is the ultraviolet and infrared. Those are the ones that dealt with directly the sun. They dealt with the light that you see coming, reflected light, or the light that was inside the light, which is the notion. If you see ultraviolet and infrared, those are the colors of your blood, ain't they? Well, essentially, that's essentially what happens. They're taking from the blood of the sun. That's why the Son of God is the sacrifice savior who gives up his life for the benefits of man. Because the ultraviolet infrared light that you're taking in is the blood of the sun. S-U-N. So now as you're beginning to see the different variations on the same theme, you're going to start seeing the people who are dealing on the lower realms. Like there ones who just want to come and bite and kill and suck on the blood. They're living on a lower dietary realm. That's people like eating meat for us, eating all kind of crap, McDonald's. And there are those who eat on the higher realms, who eat from the nuts and the fruits and the budding. Then you have the juicerians, and they do the different levels of vampires the same way. You see. So now, all the different things that they have, all the different versions of vampires are the different levels of the evolved entities that fell. Now, the ones that we're talking about, you see the ones biting on the neck with Anne Rice, those were the ones that came out through Kemet after the Great War. And the Great War, again, shifted the environment. Remember, vampires only come about when a certain environment comes about. And what is our environment? It's filthy. It's low. It's dirty. And what is one of the lowest, most simplest form of vampire we have flying around today? The mosquito. And where do mosquitoes stay? Swamps and in filthy places, places stagnant and it's stinking and so forth. Well, why would vampires start coming back here? Unless, as I was saying to you, the human condition has stultified to the point now where the blood does not match the same trajectory and velocity of being that the particular universe that we're in is now speeding at. And we are a swamp of consciousness. We're not flowing like a river anymore. You see. So this swamp of consciousness, which has become us under Christianity, is now being preyed upon by vampires because they're all here now. Why is this? Why they all got their websites up? Because we are all filthy.